ahead and get started. I'm excited and looking forward to this conversation. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I am Allie Love. I'm the in-arena host for the Brooklyn Nets. I'm a Peloton instructor and CEO and founder of Love Squad. We do women empowerment events. And so this conversation that we're going to partake in is discussing athlete activism around social justice and racial equality. I have a fantastic panel that is going to impart wisdom on us. I will say I'm truly honored to have this conversation, to be a part of this conversation. I want to have a little bit of a call to action. This is an opportunity for us to create space for and give voice to Black athletes and sports professionals during a worldwide awakening to societal injustices. We will discuss how there is an opportunity for athletes and influential individuals to leverage their personal status and prominence in the sports industry to lean into Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s call for justice, unity, and equality. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. That's going to frame up this conversation nicely. What I will say is I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. I think in order to honor our present, you have to acknowledge the past. You have to be aware of the past. And so I figured we do so in understanding who's going to be a part of this conversation. And so in no particular order whatsoever, our first panelist will be Houston Texans quarterback, business owner, and philanthropist Deshaun Watson, who guided the Texans to consecutive division titles in 2018, 2019, led the NFL in passing yards during the 2020 season. He has received Pro Bowl honors in each of his 3 seasons as Houston's primary starter and is one of 4 NFL quarterbacks with career passing ratings over 100. Next, we have sports broadcaster Ros Gold-Onwude. Now, Ros covers the NBA on ESPN, ESPN Radio, and is a reoccurring host on ESPN's First Take. She's also a part of the Brooklyn Nets family because I see her on the court all the time. She's recently joined forces with Brooklyn Nets Kevin Durant and Rich Kleiman, 35 Ventures, as one of the faces of their sports business show, The Boardroom. Also serves as an analyst for the 2020 WNBA exclusive streaming broadcast on Twitter. Following, we have BSC Global Executive Director of Diversity and Inclusion, Jackie Wilson II, who oversees the organization's D&I strategies and initiatives and helps to develop and execute BSC's overall social vision and around justice and inclusion. Following, we have Barclays Center's General Manager, Gina Irwin, joined Barclays from TD Garden in Boston with more than 25 years of experience in the sports and entertainment industry. Prior to Boston, Irwin spent 15 years at Foxwood Theater in Atlanta, as well as currently serving in the chair of the Board of Trustees on IAVM Foundation. And with that, thank you, panelists. I am honored to be with you all. Yes. So let's kick into this conversation. So I actually wanted to touch on a subject that I think everyone could be familiar with. And so when we think about activism and we think about our athletes using their voice and using their platform to call attention to face these injustices by BIPOC people, so Black, Indigenous, people of color in America, we've heard these sayings too frequently, I would say, shut up and dribble or stick to sports. What are your responses, or what's your response to those who believe that athletes should remain silent? Adina, I wanted to go to you first.
Well, I think the responsibility to do that is just the opposite. I think that businesses and people that benefit from professional sports need to be made aware of the feel-good and triumphant stories, that come out of the communities that fuel the sports and entertainment industries, but they also need to be aware of the whole picture because, the inequities and the injustices that exist in those communities also show up as well. And this movement that we're involved in, and this movement that has existed since, of course, before the Civil Rights Movement, has never been, convenient and comfortable. And so while this may be, a tough thing to hear from many people, it has to be heard.
Jackie, I wanted to lend this question to you because as we talk about these initiatives and creating framework and structure within organization, it is important when players are part of that organization. And so you hear these outside voices say these things. How do you kind of tackle that question around people that think that athletes should remain silent?
Well, I mean, the short answer is, should athletes just shut up and dribble? Like, absolutely not. Athletes, impact us in so many different ways. They impact how we dress. They impact the music that we listen to. They impact, who we vote for. I mean, we watched, Colin Kaepernick lead a worldwide movement. Most people didn't even know Raphael Warnock's name until Sue Bird wore a t-shirt. And then we watched the ladies of the WNBA, make sure that everybody remembered the name Breonna Taylor. So, an athlete's voice is extremely powerful and extremely timely, at this time, this stage of the game. But one thing that I would caution against is that I don't think that, all athletes want to use their platform. And I think that there has to be space for that, as well. And so athletes who choose to use their platform should absolutely be given the reign to do so. But if you choose not to, that has to be okay as well.
Ros, as you are someone who, again, are very close to athletes in terms of conversing with them, during the games, after the games, whether it's the NFL, the WNBA, the NBA, why is it important? I think we something Jackie says, like, not all want to speak out, but why is it important for those that do for them to use their platform, and not necessarily freely, because it's not what we're talking about, isn't something that we actually have to fight for. So why is it important that they use their platforms to speak out on these injustices?
Well, to Jackie's earlier point, for the ones that do want to speak out on the things that are passionate to them, a lot of times these athletes represent, communities that don't always have spokespeople telling the stories of their culture and lifestyles, and humanizing and really being truthful about where they're from. And, you don't always see a school teacher with a bunch of microphones in front of their face, or you likely don't get the chance to hear from someone who was wrongly imprisoned or beaten due to police brutality. But the athletes do have this platform. And what I have found, especially this summer, where I feel like a lot of athletes and just people, period, in the US found their voice, is that by using their voice, it's a way of taking control of their body and their story, and not necessarily feeling like minstrels being told to play for money and entertain us. This was a way of taking back control and using their voice. I wanted to make sure to point out too, that I think language and framing, the words we use and who the storytellers are, is really important too here. It is hard to empathize and humanize and accurately and objectively tell these stories if the subject matter is foreign. You know what I'm saying? So you need to make sure that you also, who is the storyteller? We need to ensure that there are also Black and minority journalists. And we need to hold media groups accountable to tell more Black and minority stories, and with a careful attention to language, and not just when someone has dropped 40 points in a game. That can't be the only time.
Yes. I want to come back to that accountability, but Deshaun's here. I mean, as an athlete, I can only speak to as someone who's on a platform where there are eyes on you all the time. And those same people that are going to cheer you on if you say the wrong thing on social media will be the same people that in the comment section can break you down. And so I've known firsthand how that feels. And so obviously, Deshaun, your platform is a little wider and a little different in terms of the NFL. How is it important to you personally in terms of speaking about these things, especially right now when we are in this kind of civil unrest, social unrest, where everything is so heightened?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to Jackie's point of, before, because I was one of those athletes, coming into the league, and even in college, I didn't want to speak on it too much because I felt like I didn't know the full history. But as I got in the NFL and I started talking to, a couple of my players and, a couple of coaches that's, was back in the day playing football and was dealing with, the things that we're still dealing with, towards today. I lived a lot of those moments growing up too. I just didn't even notice it. There's a lot of times where my, sports and athletics kind of, controlled it and kind of blocked it and pushed it to the side. And I was just so locked in on that, where, in reality, we go out there and we play, of course, on Sundays, or, and then we go out there and, we practice and leave the locker room and the facility. But at the end of the day, we still live just like the normal people. And, I think that athletes, and for myself this year, I came out and spoke more about it because it's real life, it's reality. And I feel like that's what this world needed to come and recognize that, this is real life. These are people that, wanting that should want to change, and regardless of what color you are. So Yeah, I've dealt with it, and I've been able to speak out more about it.
It's interesting, Deshaun, you touched on three things: awareness, literacy, and then the ability to articulate what you're feeling. And I think all of those things are very challenging, right? Awareness is like, hey, microaggressions, like you said, I dealt with it my whole life. Sometimes you didn't know because it's just a way of life. You're like, this is just how life is. So you just handle it. So it's like creating that sense of awareness. And then it's literacy, where it's like, okay, this is exactly where we come from. Here's what's wrong systematically, the structure. Here's what's going on and how it's affecting me. And then being able to, like you said, articulate those feelings, put it all together. And it takes time. And so I actually want to kind of pivot a little bit, because I know what it feels like to feel like the athlete in the organization when we talk about systematic racism, when we talk about a system. Jackie and Adina, as those of you that are part of a system, a structure, what are some ways that owners and leaders in the sports and entertainment franchise can support players when it comes to social injustice, and when it comes to social justice, and when it comes to that again, those three pillars of awareness, of literacy, that education, and then being able to shape that message, to Ros's point, for them to tell their story? Either one of you want to jump in? Adina, you can take that. Y'all are within the organization, so
I'm happy to chime in.
Yeah, go for it, Jackie.
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways that, owners and teams can support their players. I think, one, they can take a stand and make a statement of their own. I think two, they can amplify the voices of their athletes by promoting player initiatives. And then three, they can work themselves to, push for the change in society that their players are looking to achieve. I will say that I'm fortunate enough to work for an organization that has done all three. I mean, it's been well documented where Joe and Clara Sy stand in terms of their support for social justice and statements against racism. Two, we as a company, have worked hard to amplify our players' voices and support their initiatives. And then separately, Joe and Clara Sy created their own $50 million social justice fund to drive economic empowerment and address systemic imbalances in health, wealth, and education. So, teams, owners, organizations can do a lot to move the needle and really lead the charge in this regard.
So, Jackie, you say a lot. Adina, can you give us an example that could help support that? Because I think it's so important when we have these conversations. Because when you say tag statements like, we want justice, we want it now, what does that look like? And to the point of literacy, sometimes when you are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, person of color, you know that you just want to feel good. You want to fit in. You don't know how it shows up. So what are some examples when we talk about, like you said, the $50 million around social justice fund that Joe and Clara Sy have done, but what are some examples of that showing up in an organization, Adina? I think, again, being specific is so important.
Yeah, so I think that the key is being very cognizant as an organization and authentic as an organization of really looking in the community and figuring out what the needs are in the community and how you can partner in the community. So because we know that systemic racism, et cetera, shows up in all different segments of the community. So, from barriers to education to, the pipeline into incarceration to affordable housing and access to affordable housing, and the list goes on, where different organizations like the NETS organization, like what Clara and Joe Sy are doing, can show up. Even, as simple as, a specific example is when I think about barriers to education, I'm thinking about, literacy for children who are going into their third grade year. We know that if a child is not reading on grade level by the time they get to the third grade, that they will more than likely be susceptible to potentially not graduating from high school and definitely not going to postgraduate education, et cetera. So when you see that those types of markers, those are places where you can jump in. Those are places where organizations like this can jump in and really make a difference and build a deeper and farther reaching relationship with the community that they benefit from, as well as the community that they serve. This organization is very much being actionable with their resources and their time. And that's not something that you see across this industry and across the NBA, as you know. And so I think that the authenticity that this organization shows is real, and it will be sustaining, and it will build a relationship that is far reaching, far beyond what happens on the court.
Ros, I want to get you in here because I feel like you're the conduit between being a part of a system and then hearing what players really say. But before I get to you, I know, Jackie, you wanted to make a point. So I want you to jump in as we kind of layer on these specific examples. So important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked about the $50 million social justice fund. You know, I want to tell you a little bit about where some of that's going. I mean, the first grant recipients are 5 Black leaders in Brooklyn, you know, as part of the Black Voices for Black Justice Fund. You know, these 5 outstanding Black leaders are working to tackle the root causes of racial disparity in healthcare, climate policy, education, journalism, and the criminal justice system. And so, you know, we as an organization are honored to be able to support their work and stand by them as they work to create a more just and inclusive Brooklyn. You know, but another initiative that we're really proud of is our supplier diversity program. One of the action points in Joe and Clara's social justice commitment was to strive for diversity in selecting the vendors and suppliers that we work with and work with our sponsors to support Black and minority-owned businesses. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, has been awful for everyone, but it's really shed new light on racial disparities in our country. And one of the examples of that is the disproportionate damage that's been done to minority-owned businesses in New York City. So, you know, understanding these barriers that many business owners currently face, you know, our goal is to provide them with new opportunity to grow revenue and gain more exposure. So, you know, we're excited about, you know, the work that we have currently done. We're excited about the launch of the diversity program, but we think that these are all action steps to really uplift the community in which we call home.
Absolutely. Ros, getting you in here because again, we talk about home. We were saying how we have like a national home where you're arena to arena. What are you hearing when we talk about these conversations? Because it's so important. It is one thing to be in an institution and say, like, as an organization, we think we're doing right. We are leaning into our community. But of course, these injustices exceed and expand beyond our community. And so what are you hearing when we talk to like players and we talk to people? I always say you got your ear to the street. So when we talk to players and then you're being a part of these organizations, again, what are you hearing and how can you share some of that with us?
I like that, with your ear to the streets.
Yeah, girl.
You know, I do kind of wear a few hats, you know. I do have my journalist hat, you know, I have had corporate hats, and I'm an athlete as well and played, you know, ball before. So I have a real connection in that way. First and foremost, I just want to give like this to Jackie's answer, because as a journalist, I feel like I'm constantly delivering reports on some, leader of some kind of organization, not just teams, just any kind of organization, slapping money at the problem. And often I'm wondering, where does that money go? How do they figure out which people it goes to or which organizations it goes to? How do they make sure that that commitment and intensity of commitment is sustained over the course of years and not just with the first press statement? So I sat here just through your whole answer. And I'm not surprised at all at the commitment from Joe and Clara's side and the Brooklyn Nets. I have had the chance to see their commitment with the New York Liberty on the WNBA side, and it's genuine what they're doing in New York. And it brings me to a larger answer, Allie, to your question, where it's like talking to these athletes and then also relating it to the public, whether you're on the side of athletes should just play or athletes should have a voice. I will say this, the use of their platforms did lead to actionable change this summer. And there's a number of examples. You know, absolutely, we saw the impact of the WNBA with the letters they wrote, the collaborative protests visual protests they did with either T-shirts, Vote Warnock. We saw teams and players doing that in response to the disparaging comments from Senator Loeffler at the time against the WNBA using their platform to discuss Black Lives Matter and basically anything that had to do with the preserving of the rights of Black and minority people. And it was hard because she, you know, is a co-owner of the Dream. I absolutely think we saw a huge impact from the WNBA that rose the profile and visibility of Reverend Warnock. And it later ended up helping him to take the seat of senator and be the first Black senator for Georgia. And that was major. We should also shout out Stacey Abrams as well and all the effort there to help against voter suppression. But the point of that story is to say the voices of these women of the WNBA absolutely made a difference. And so it's not just for show. On the NBA side, I know some people might have initially said, oh, they're just wearing messaging on their jerseys or putting BLM on the court. What's that really going to do? There was actually really substantial action that came from that. One of the things over the majority of NBA teams use their arenas or practice facilities as places for voting centers. And you see what, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on and who you were voting for, you see that the access to these voting and polling stations absolutely mattered in such a tight race. So the fight against voter suppression from the NBA and WNBA and the collaborative effort between the players and their team governors and owners to put pressure really on them to make something happen. And it came from the voices and the pressure of the players and the players associations and the collaboration of the league and the team governors. And then I'll point out one more big example. The NBA came up with the NBA Foundation Fund, $300 million dedicated to improving economic equity in Black and minority communities over the course of 10 years. That is a substantial amount of money. And it doesn't happen if just one player steps up, even two. It was the collaborative effort of NBA players and the Players Association, not backing down, not shutting up and dribbling, and real change, real action came from it. So it worked.
Absolutely. And the first thing, one of the things that came up while you were talking, whether it's a headline or it's deep into the story, it's all about the bottom line. Well, what's really happening, because eyes are watching. And some of the most important eyes are watching our younger generation, who have been very pivotal in pushing this change, whether on these social platforms that you may be keen to or not, TikTok or Instagram or Twitch or any of these things. Like, being politically and socially active and vocal has been very helpful. And I'll switch this around a little bit and say, you know, Deshaun, you're a high profile Black athlete playing a position that has traditionally been dominated, if not currently still dominated, by white players. You know, your success and your voice, it doesn't go unnoticed. You have the ears and the eyes of the younger generation. How do you hope and how do you know that it's serving as inspiration? And how is this is this something of substance? How is this so important?
Just because of, like you said, it's action, and the words and the I guess the symbols and the signs and the things that they see on Sunday, you know, that's on the football field and on the jerseys, on the helmets. It brings questions. And the younger generation, they see that. And so they're asking questions, not necessarily that they're asking their parents questions. Everyone has cell phones. So they Google something, they Google a name, they Google, you know, Black Lives Matter, or they Google something on social media, and it brings all this topic up. And so now that gives them access to what's really going on. And then they see their favorite players. You know, I had a lot of the younger generation, you know, contact me on Instagram, you know, under my comments, contact my agent. And then they see me, you know, walking with the George Floyd family, and they see the action. So they want to do these things because their, you know, favorite player or the people that they watch and they cheer for is doing the same thing. And a lot of people don't realize when they say, hey, just shut up and dribble a basketball or shut up and throw a football, they don't realize that we have a lot of impact on the younger generation, because sports is one activity or event that can bring all generations together. You know, if you know, you have 80,000 people in the stadium, it's not just 80,000 Black people, it's not just 80,000 white people. It's, you know, Hispanics, Mexicans, Chinese, all types of people, and they all cheering for one task at hand. So if you have an opportunity to, you know, send a message while everyone is watching with good energy, good positive energy, then that can spread love, you know, to the next task at hand.
One of the things you touch on is representation matters. I know that comes up in a lot of diversity, inclusion, and equity conversations of representation matters. But one of the other things, it reminded me a little bit, I watched a night, what is it, a night in Miami, one night in Miami? That's what it was, one night in Miami. And having key figures of part of the Black community come together in a room, in a hotel room, and connect, right? You know, I'm going to quote a Hamilton here where it says, in the room where it happened. Right. And so our room, and to your point, Deshaun, our room expands beyond just like that hotel room back in the day. It's on social media. It's you on the field. It's actually having these key figures show up in the neighborhoods, in the communities, as Adina mentioned, but also on social platforms, and saying, like, this is what doing good, this is what being good, and this is what activism on any scale looks like. I will applaud many of us that are on this call, because when we think of activism, sometimes many people have taken it the wrong direction and said, you know what, I have to be out there marching. All of a sudden, I have to do some big initiative. You don't have to have $50 million. You know what I mean? You don't have to be able in a position to donate. That's okay. Activism on any scale is still activism, whether it's showing up on social, education, through conversation, shopping local, shopping Black. These are all forms of activism. And I think when it's represented and exemplified in our key figures in our community, change does happen. Speaking of key figures, you know, Adina and Ros, you both are change makers. I mean, that's to say the least in your respective areas of sports business. Ros, sports journalist, sideline reporter, Adina, general manager of a major sports and entertainment venue. You both have experience and navigated an industry. We talked about Deshaun's position being predominantly past and present, predominantly occupied by a non-BIPOC person. You've experienced the same thing where your industry is pretty much, I mean, me too, male dominated, like if not white male dominated. One of the things that comes to mind when I think of representation is allyship. When we have key figures in key places, we need to be supported by all voices. And so would you say that allyship is key to opening up more doors for Black and brown women, BIPOC, non-gender defining or conforming folks? And if so, how does that show up? I'm gonna kick it off. I'm gonna kick it back to you, Adina, if you don't mind. How does that show up?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely necessary because, as you mentioned, you know, this is an organization or an industry, if you will, that there are not very many people that look like me. And so the people that are going to be there to encourage me, to help to provide access to networks and, you know, circles of influence and expose me to disciplines and practices and things that I otherwise wouldn't have had access to, they don't look like me. So in essence, you know, you have to have that allyship and those people who have the aptitude and the resilience to be an ally, because it's not always popular. It's not popular in their business settings. It may not be popular within their family to take on those types of roles, but I would not be here if I hadn't had the support and assistance from, like I said, people who are, you know, are different than I am. And I think that, you know, that shows up by giving, again, like I said, the access to those circles and open those networks and be there, you know, as an ally to answer questions and provide information and, you know, welcome me to this, you know, to have a seat at the table and be a part of the table and to eat at the table. That's the consistency that is needed and I think the dedication that is needed from an ally in allyship. So I think that it's hard for some people to step into that role. But I think, you know, people oftentimes ask, you know, well, how do I do that? And what should I do? And my answer to them is, one, you have to, I think, be prepared to and okay to feel uncomfortable, be okay to ask questions, be okay to maybe start small with your group of friends and your close connections, and then, you know, expand that circle, but do it, start, because there's so many people out here that can benefit from that. And again, like I said, I would not be sitting here before you if I hadn't had the support of allyship.
Absolutely. Ros, I want you to jump in here. I think I'm going to give you, again, this kind of concept of ear to the street. And Adina, I mean, I remember working at Barclays Center. It seems so far away because we're all working away from home right now, in our home. But seeing, you know, BIPOC or seeing like Black women on the court coming up to never hosting an NBA game in my life, 18,000 people in the stands coming on the court and having games where I see Ros or I see Adina, and I'm just like, I felt seen. Even if they're working and didn't necessarily see me, I felt like it was important that, again, that representation was there. And then to see how you all engage in a white male dominated industry, again, creating and forming allies. How is that, again, how has that showed up for you, Ros, and why is it key?
Yeah, I echo the same sentiments. Like, you know, seeing you when I come to do a Brooklyn Nets game, and now when I see Adina, now that we've just formally met here, even if it doesn't need to be spoken, it's understood. The space is safer just by you being there, and I'm there too, you know, and it feels good when I see you there kicking butt, you know, and I think that's probably what the commitment needs to be, where it can be a safe space to be a Black woman. Yeah, I think to Adina's point, you need champions. And of course we need each other, but we also need men. We also need white people, you know, to be a part of this conversation and dialogue. I'm not a fan of Black people having a separate conversation only. I think, everyone must be included in the dialogue for this to really be healthy and actually see something come from it. I'll speak from the Black female journalist mindset. In sports, I feel like workspaces are doing more. I'm seeing a shift in this change, but making it a safe space to be yourself. And I feel like so often, especially young Black women, are, whether it was told to them directly or if they're just reading the cues, are so busy trying to hide who they really are and hide themselves just to make everyone else comfortable. And honestly, it is infuriating. I'm like, I get upset thinking about it, but like so many young girls come to me asking about, the way they talk or their hair, or you're trying to hide your curves while your counterparts who might have different body types are wearing the exact same outfits. And I'm talking about these women are laboring hours before they can even get to the content of doing a good job in this broadcast. And how can you expect to be dominant when you're afraid that being yourself will get you penalized? It's not a system that you're set up to succeed in. It needs to be a safe space. And that's on the ownership of the leaders to make it a place where the identity and culture of Black people and Black women is valued and celebrated.
I want to take it out of the arena for a second and again, out of the system. When we talked about having this conversation at the dinner table, many of us, we always have that joke of like Thanksgiving, you don't want to get that one uncle revved up because they have all the opposing views. So Jackie, when we think of having this conversation around allyship, and maybe we stop using that word allyship because sometimes I think it can be assumed, optical allyship can be assumed. You can say the right things. You can be in the system and again, follow the protocols, but not truly be welcoming, not truly create that safe space. As again, a Black woman on the court at the Brooklyn Nets, I was like, yeah, I'm wearing my heels. I'm wearing my big afro. I want every little girl that walks in this arena to see this is what Brooklyn excellence looks like. I'm not the only one by far, but it is my honor to just be on this stage to do so. But again, taking it out of the arena, Jackie, why do you think some people move away? And this was this came up today a lot on social. If you're silent, like then you're adding to the violence, or it came, again, civil unrest that we're currently in. It came up in 2020. Why is it so challenging for folks to have that conversation when they say, well, I'm not necessarily a part of that marginalized group. I don't know what to say. So I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to say the wrong thing. One, why is it important not to go that route? And two, how can they navigate it? What are some tools to kind of engage?
Well, I mean, I think that it goes back to, a point that Adina made. I think that, we as a society have to move into the place to where we are comfortable being uncomfortable. I think that we oftentimes, avoid things that become uncomfortable, especially if you have the privilege to be able to do so. And, I'll say, I'll admit, like being an ally is difficult. It is difficult walking into a situation and not knowing, what to say. It is difficult not knowing how to make someone feel better when you are in that situation. But it is incredibly difficult to be the person that feels bad. And like, that's the part that oftentimes is missed. And so sometimes it's not about saying the right thing. It's about creating space. It's about just being there for someone. And so one of the things that I always encourage allies, and Ros pointed this out earlier, is, if you are in a room where everyone is similarly, situated or thinking along the same lines, like real change isn't happening. And so I always challenge, people who want to be allies to go tell a friend to tell a friend. That's how this, spreads. Go into the next room, have that uncomfortable conversation. Like to your point about uncomfortable Thanksgiving conversations, I shared this with my coworkers. I'm here for all of them. Like I'm here to make you uncomfortable. Because I'm here to make you uncomfortable so that we can get to a better place. And I'm not willing to bite my tongue for the sake of your comfort. All of us are looking to be unapologetic about who we are. And I think that that's extremely important. I'm thrilled to be sharing this stage with you guys, and my sons being able to watch this and see that there are, different paths that they can take, to be successful, because, you dream, what you see. And so if you see a NFL star quarterback, you see someone running, one of the top arenas in the world, you see Ros, battling with Stephen A on First Take, like that, those things are, goosebumps, inside. And so it changes the way that people dream. So all of it's important, but it goes back to, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's where the real change happens.
Deshaun, I want to tap you in because you've done a great job of this. One of the things not only have you done in terms of the role of activism, but it's using that platform to show Black love, to show strength, to show what an athlete looks like, how they act. And I think that is, again, so key. And you always remind me of what our younger generation would pick up on, right? Like right. I'm going to say I'm a part of the younger generation because every time I say that, it makes me feel old. So that's a personal thing, side note. But for those that are listening and that have their eyes peeled and their ears open to what you're doing, but they themselves, as they're rising through the ranks and working hard to potentially be where you are, what advice would you give them when they say, well, I'm scared to speak out. Like, I'm scared because I don't want to lose a scholarship. I don't want to put myself in a position at 17 or at 15 where the Instagram followers, because that's our current state, that they'll just leave. And I'm not ready to rally that. Because again, I know that I deal with that. And I can only imagine as we get more socially savvy, as we really lean into the followers and having more, how speaking out can inhibit a young person's dream. And they may not become, Deshaun, because if they say the wrong thing at the wrong time, a wrong reporter will pick it up and their careers was a byline and not a fact.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
I would say, I mean, like you guys were saying, you have to be yourself first, and you can't be afraid of speaking reality facts. And if a college or a university, don't want you because of how you feel or what you've been through, then that's not the place you need to be. You shouldn't be going there anyway. Like, for instance, with me and going to Clemson University, being a African-American quarterback in that university with Dabo, like, he was all for it. Him and all the other coaching staff was all for it and knew where I was coming from and knew the things that I've been through. And they were accepting me and brought me in like a young kid and made sure that I was successful. So I would just say for them to be able to continue to learn and educate themselves and ask questions from people that's been there and experienced and just be able to, say it the right way. But at the same time, don't hold your tongue for, a reason, because you think that someone else is going to, take it the wrong way. You just got to be yourself.
We're moving into the latter part. I have some closing questions that our panelists don't know about, still on topic, but I did want to get into this because I think all of us being able to touch on this, obviously it's MLK Day, right? Martin Luther King Jr. And we talk often about moments, but I think what's so important is the movement. And what we forget is moments are days like this, days of recognizing. Right? In order to, we honor the present, we have to acknowledge the past. That's a moment of acknowledgement. And honoring is a movement. Movement means that it's continuous. So what are we doing tomorrow? And so it's about 60 years ago, I Have a Dream speech was delivered. It is still relevant today, whether you feel like that's painful or not. It's up to you to feel, not for me to tell you how to feel. Many of us understand that the fight for social justice is not a series of these moments, right? It's not just one day like this. It's not just one panel like this, but rather that movement that I talked about, that it's consistent, that it's ongoing. Any thoughts on how we can continue to hold ourselves, our organizations, our community, our elected officials and leaders accountable for real change and sustainable change? I will, as you think of this, because I feel like this is a robust question, one of the things that came up for me is not only being a host of the Brooklyn Nets and working within the Brooklyn Nets organization and being proud of the initiative and the granularism, which isn't a word, but granularism around how we're saying this is our initiative and here's our specific plan. I'm also a Peloton instructor. $100 million we've obligated to becoming an anti-racist organization. And doing the work internally, I've seen this unfold in front of my eyes. I've been a part of these conversations where you're saying this isn't enough. This is how we show up. And when I think of this movement, it doesn't come from the top down. I don't think I necessarily work for any organization or subscribe working to for any organization where it's top down. It may be center out, It may be a person out, but it's never the top down. And so when you think of this movement, for me, first and foremost comes on those that are closer to the issue should be able to speak up on how to solve that issue. That's what a movement is being able to hear the voices of those that are affected and say, here's how we're creating a structure. This is how we're creating a strategy, and this is what success looks like. And so when we talk about creating real sustainable change and accountability, how does that show up? And not only, I'm going to push all a little bit, not in the area of the hats you wear or the labels you have being a part of this last generation. How does that show up professionally and personally for you? I know that one was loaded, so that's why I took a long-winded, like I said, I'm setting it up. Feel free to jump in.
Well, I would jump in and just say, to me, this is wide, and this is also very, very small. So when you talk about your personal, like how you show up personally in this movement, but then also broad, I would say that, being married to someone who was a public official in the Atlanta metro area, I know for a fact that, it's always helpful, especially when dealing with public entities, to show up to those conversations with solutions and pathways forward, so that you minimize the opportunity for the public entities or the public organizations to find excuses as to not engage or not to do whatever it is that you feel like needs to be done. So I would say, from a broad perspective, as we're thinking about, solutions in the ways that in these voices that we have from these different communities speaking up, to show up to those conversations with specifics and with solutions, and not be dependent upon the people sitting on the other side of the table to come up with that, because that gives them a way to wiggle their way out of it if they don't feel like maybe it's as important as it needs to be, or they may not want to hear your voice. In essence, be deliberate and purposeful about the message that you're delivering. So that's the broad. That's just one way to come at those conversations and those voices. From a very small perspective, and what I do and what I like to do is very simple. It kind of touches on what Ros and Allie talked about, as far as just in your own, how you show up in spaces, and understanding that how you look, how you speak, how you carry yourself. People are watching. Little girls are watching. Little boys are watching. And there's activism in that, because they see that this is possible. This can be. I can actually do this. Just seeing that and feeling that is a source of activism. To me, the fact that you're able to do this, and all around you that you may be one of a few, but you acknowledge it, but you don't live in that space because you got a job to do. Because your job is to make sure that you blaze a trail for all of the people that are going to be coming in behind you. That is activism. I'm setting the table for the next generation that's coming up behind me. And that's what I think about every single day that I come to work. That's the small piece of activism that I show up with and I walk in with every day to every conversation that I have into this panel today.
That's a word.
I know. I was like, do I have a mic? Like, can I?
That's a word.
Like, bye everybody. Like,
should have ended on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Ros.
I'll jump in because that inspired a lot in me listening to those words. I definitely feel like when when there's apathy or a lack of engagement or will to do something in a community, it usually comes from a space of you feel powerless, or like you don't have any control over changing the situation or the circumstances. And I think one of the things is like figuring out what are things that you can control and trying to find meaning in them. I know for me, this summer, I've always been passionate on all these topics that we're discussing today, but I definitely think this summer, like it did for many Americans and many athletes and many people, certainly awoken a different voice for me. I mean, I marched in my first protest this summer. It's the type of thing you heard your parents did, but I hadn't done it. And that was an experience in itself. So, for me, like the things that I can control is I do have a platform, maybe not as big as Deshaun's, but I can, what are the stories I'm telling? Who are the people I'm interviewing? Why am I interviewing? What am I trying to get out of this? And then, Allie, to your point, I've made a personal challenge, and I stated that actually during the summer when, we were at really in the heart of a lot of the unrest in America, I was like, I'm not going to lose sight of this when things simmer down. And you know what, things haven't even simmered down, but we are still in unrest. But like, I mean, of course, they can be more, you know, on the more serious side of, you know, protests or marginalized communities, but it can also be subtly slipped in. I'll give you an example of just a celebration of Black life. And here's one that also intertwines my African heritage. My father's Nigerian. For instance, we had a playoff game last year. And it was the 76ers and the Raptors. Yes, the 76ers and the Raptors. And so that first quarter, first time out, I'm about to deliver some kind of hit as a sideline reporter. And normally, you know, the producer's trying to tell you, you know, if it's injury update, you have to do that. But, you know, like sometimes it's just really generic. And I pushed to get this story in because I felt like it was significant. And personally, I felt it was important to me. The fact that Joel Embiid and Pascal Siakam are both Cameroonians playing on this huge stage as the centerpieces and the stars of one of the stars of their teams. And it's, when you think about all the big pro players that came out of Cameroon or even Africa, period, I mean, we're talking fingers. So this is absolutely significant. And I was able to pitch that story and then come up with a story that celebrated both the cities they're from, the differences in the cultures in the city, and kind of like how at home there's this big rivalry watching these two on the court. And that's how I set up the game. From my little role in sideline reporter is look at these two young men from Africa on the biggest stage facing off. And that was something I could control. And that helps build the story as well.
Wow. Great job. You said your little role. So I just wanted to take a moment to like take that off the table. No more minimizing. You have a big role. You've been a part of many, if not probably all the folks on this call's live. So big role. Deshaun, I want to tap you in terms of like this professional and this personal. You talked a lot about the professional, of how you've been able to be, how you show up in creating real change in representation. In your personal life, how does that show up? How does that translate in terms of sustainable change and having these types of conversations?
Really, I mean, I was going to say, it's kind of the same. I kind of don't divide both of them. You know, whatever you see on social media, whatever you see, you know, in real life, that's just me. Being hands-on in these communities. And I can't remember who said it earlier, but walking into these communities, a lot of these communities, especially that are, you know, Section A and a lot of, you know, African Americans feel powerless, because I grew up in there. I felt powerless. All I knew was what I saw, and that was that little block that I was living on and what my mom was going through and different things. So for me to be able to be hands-on and just go to these communities like today, or not even today, yesterday, I went down to, you know, one of the communities that Pop Smoke was from, and just kind of chilled on the block and was able to talk to some people and kids and you know, kind of see how they're doing and see how, you know, different things, you know, that they've been experiencing this past 2020 and what I can do to help. You know, I'm not even from New York. I've been up here a handful of times and be able to be from Atlanta, Georgia, and live in Houston, Texas, and come up here and be able to touch people, you know, it's very, very inspiring and motivating for myself to continue to do that across the world. And hopefully those kids can go talk to more kids and kind of spread that word, you know, along New York. And then it just kind of, you know, trickles on. So, you know, for me, if I can touch one person to be able to change and get them on the right track and see the things that they can see to, you know, inspire them and change this world in a positive way, that's what I'm all about.
I want to touch, Jackie, before you jump in, I want to touch on something too in connecting this. Is, Deshaun, you have said literally my life's mantra is the catalyst for change is conversation. Being able to go somewhere, have a conversation that creates change. The way it creates change is because it's a catalyst of thought. Like it creates thought, it creates a spark in someone or something or a group of people. And so I think, again, coming back, I wanted to like high level this because that was one of the things that came up for me when we think of like personal and professional. There is a moment where it does come together, that it is synonymous. And in each of those fields, in each of those areas, the catalyst for change is conversation, which is what we're doing now. And I'm so grateful. On that, Jackie, I want you to get in on this.
Yeah, Allie, you sort of stole my thunder with that answer right there.
Are we twinsies? Are we twinsies here?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's It's really about the conversation. And, you know, I do that, you know, personally, and I'm blessed to have a job to where, you know, I can have this conversation at work. I mean, you guys are joining me and Adina at work today to have this conversation, you know, in front of our coworkers and season ticket members and fans. And I think that that's important. You know, we talked before about allyship and how I'm always saying that you have to tell a friend to tell a friend. And like part of that is letting people in on that conversation. There's no doubt in my mind that our conversation would have been very similar if no one was there but the five of us. If the five of us were sitting in a room and we were just sitting around a table, I think that we would still come to the same conclusions. I think that we'd still be discussing the same topics and all of us would have felt better. But I don't know that we would have done anything to impact change. I think the fact that the five of us are having this conversation in front of everyone, and then this is going to be posted so that other people can come back and listen to this. I think that that's the way that you really bring about change, because I think that, you know, the people that work with us know us on a different level now, because they've heard this conversation. They've seen how we relate, you know, to each other. And I think that there's some takeaways that hopefully will adjust some of their mindset and behavior going forward. So, you know, it's about like continuing the conversation and bringing more people into the fold.
I'm going to get to my last question. I'm going to actually pose the question now and then interject, because I'm going to give you a little space to think about it. It's not challenging, but it's not easy. It's not hard, but it's challenging. If you could leave us with one word that sums up this conversation for you and your perspective. So take a moment. But one of the things, again, leaving us with one word, just one adjective, one word, anything that speaks to you that you would want to share to leave us with. I will say one of the things that came up for me, I wanted to actually touch on this question of real change and sustainability from a point of view of someone who's a part of an organization such as the Brooklyn Nets and Peloton, where we have 3.6 million members. Being in front of that many eyes is not always easy, but I take that social responsibility seriously. And I think one of the ways on a more, again, micro level that I think that I'm committed into creating change is if I believe that conversation is the catalyst for change, I have to position myself to have conversations. In order to have conversations, I have to be aware of what's going on. In order to be aware of what's going on, I also then need to know about those topics. And most times we don't have time. I don't know, for me, reading a book is a luxury I cannot afford right now. And so when it comes to it, it's our timeline. It's diversifying. I would say the one takeaway for me in terms of creating sustainable change is diversifying our timeline. What are you feeding yourself in your feed, right? That's why I call it feed. I hope you're not hungry, because it should be feeding you. If it's not feeding you, unfollow. And so I strongly encourage all of us, no matter where you are, whether it's Facebook, whether it's your news, like making sure you diversify that. Sometimes that feels uncomfortable, right? Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You have to hear both sides to understand your perspective, to understand how to articulate your perspective. And so for me, I would say one of the biggest, on a micro level, is diversifying my timeline, making sure that those that are serving content not only look different in generation, race, and color, but also believe a multitude of different things, a variety of different things. If I'm going to subscribe to diversity, it's not binary. Diversity isn't binary. And so making sure that the consumption of media is truly diverse. Another thing, if you do have the luxury of reading, diversifying your bookshelf. If that's your thing, diversifying your newsfeed, and then most importantly, your friend group. If you look around and you go out and everyone is homogenous, and for those that say, well, I can't help where I live, everyone just looks like, no problem. Then you lean into that consumption of media where it's truly diverse, and then you can create that diverse conversation. So that's something, as we were talking about social media with Deshaun and how most of the people that see him are that younger generation that are really in tune. Let's continue to keep our ear to the street. And with that, I want to say, like, what's that one word that y'all are going to leave us with? Anybody go first? I'm excited. I need to write them down, so I will be looking down while you speak.
Well, I would say my one word is stewardship. Stewardship, because I think that, you know, this is a movement, and how we show up in this movement, how we show up in this space, it has a responsibility to it. We have a responsibility to make sure that we leave the space, when we do leave the space, better off than it was when we found it. So that's being a good steward of the space that we're in, be it your job, be it the movement itself, be it activism, be it any space that you're in, I think that stewardship is so key.
My word is endurance. And the reason for endurance is there's more work to do. You know, after, you know, all the protests and marches and all the great things that came from our activism as a unit, as a community, as a country, you know, for George Floyd, for Jacob Blake, for Breonna Taylor, you know, just recently we get the news that, you know, Jacob Blake's shooter was not charged, and that was disheartening. Or, you know, regardless of what side you're on, it was inspiring what the women of the WNBA, the impact they were able to have, and what Stacey Abrams was able to do against voter suppression in Georgia for that senator race. Literally a day later, I think that the Capitol building was like seized by rioters. You know, so there's going to be ups and downs, and I think we need endurance. And I think endurance is a good word that embodies the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. In that he showed us by his example that this is going to take a lifetime of determination and commitment.
Yeah.
For me, I would say progression. I would say there, and then another thing too is that we as a society, we can't get impatient or discouraged with the process. So that's why I use progression, because each step is going to be very, very crucial. And it's going to take some time, and there's going to be a lot of steps and a lot of, you know, good, but a lot of bad that's going to come with it. But at the same time, we got to know that each step, you know, for however long it's going to take for generations, for our younger generations, so they can have a better future, it's going to take time, and we got to master that. So for me, it's progression.
And then for me, it's accountability. I think that, you know, when you know better, you should do better. And, you know, Dr. King, you know, said, what are you doing for others? And so we need to hold ourselves accountable. We need to hold our friends accountable, our coworkers, our companies accountable. You know, don't be silent about things that are not right. Hold each other accountable, and let's get together and keep pushing forward.
Well, on that note, oh, go ahead.
What's your word?
Oh, I was thinking, I actually didn't prepare because I was setting y'all up, but I think the word that would come up for me is gratitude. I think it's sometimes hard to be grateful for the struggle that we're in, but I'm so grateful for our leaders, for those that are fighting relentlessly, those that have fought. I'm so grateful for my ancestors. Like I'm just so beyond gratitude. And I think Deshaun, you kind of mentioned this of like, don't get impatient. And Ros, you're saying endurance. I think this, for me, allowing my resistance during this time to be joy. It's almost like, yeah, that's like my shield. That's like my Captain America shield. It's like, I'm going to be so grateful for this fight because I'm ready. It's not easy. We will be great stewards. We will be holding each other accountable. We will have endurance because this is about progression. So thank you. On that note, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in the moment of comfort and convenience, but where he stands the times of challenge and controversy. And I want to say thank you all so much for joining and partaking and sharing in this conversation. To our panelists, to those of you that are tuned in, those of you that did not catch it live but are catching this on demand, thank you. BSC, you were amazing. Sadra and team, exceptional. Joe and Clara Sy for creating this platform. Barclays Center and the Brooklynettes, we love y'all. It's a game tonight. And again, if you're taking on demand, catch that too. You might already know the score, but live right now, it's a game. So let's go ahead and get this game. Deshaun, Adina, Ros, Jackie, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.